stress how important it seems to me that we boost the current negotiations on the transatlantic trade and investment partnership called TTIP. We should conclude it as soon as possible. I know there are many people around with doubts and critics, and perhaps there are real reasons to criticize some of the articles, some of the paragraphs. But I'm wholeheartedly convinced that for British and German companies, this agreement will produce enormous amounts of positive effects. We are already today very successful in the US, but we have also realized over the last 4 or 5 years that the somehow old-fashioned instrument of bilateral and multilateral trade arrangements has seen an unprecedented revival. And we see such bilateral and multilateral agreements emerging in the Pacific, in the Asian era. We see it with regard to Australia, Canada, the United States, China, Japan, and many, many other countries. We should not allow Europe to be bypassed by this new developments, and therefore we should take on the challenge. And whenever grassroots movements, protesters, are criticizing and accusing our governments with the argument that TTIP is the wrong thing at the wrong time, we should stand that debate, and I'm sure we will overcome, because it's basically a good idea and it's the interest of both our countries and Europe as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let me finally address a challenge that we are now facing in Germany and in wide parts of Europe, and this is the refugee crisis. The refugee crisis is a crisis of humanitarian values. It is a crisis of the political state order in the Middle East, and it is a crisis of globalization. And we want to make use of globalization, when we want to make use of all the potential growth, of the growth potential that exists, we need a stable international order. This is why Chancellor Merkel has invested so much time and energy in settling the Ukrainian crisis. It is far from being settled, but we have at least contained the crisis. We have made sure that the Ukrainian government is really elected and the Ukrainian state can continue to exist and to function, even if the crisis is very deep and severe. We have avoided a hot war in a region that is already damaged by 60 years of communism in the past. Stable framework conditions. That is why Chancellor Merkel has invested so enormously, such an enormous amount of time and energy in resolving the euro and sovereign debt crisis in Europe. We have from 2005 on accepted many, many European programs to support and to help countries like Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and we have been very successful. The euro as a currency still exists, and even if British people do not like the euro as a national currency, the entire British government is highly interested in preserving the euro as a currency of the rest of Europe. If the euro would die, if the euro would break down, we would have disastrous economic consequences across Europe and perhaps even around the globe. And this was why we have said, well, we have to prove strength as far as the principle is concerned and solidarity at a time. And this is why we have helped countries like Ireland and Spain to implement necessary reforms, and they did it in a very successful way. When I see the brave reforms implemented in Ireland and the mood of the Irish people, when I see how flourishing today the Spanish economy again has revived the crisis, then I'm proud of all the efforts. And there was the biggest crisis in this summer when in Greece a government was elected that denied the need for reforms entirely, that felt strong enough to set its own principles higher than the common rules of the European Union and the Eurozone. It was a difficult debate. And many people said, well, if they have chosen such a government, if the government is defending that policy, we should not interfere, let them go. This would have been a very stupid and wrong decision, and therefore we have invested time and guarantees and energy to convince Greece of the need for reforms. And today we are very proud when we see that the new government has been elected on the basis of the reforms that have been agreed in Brussels. So we are strongly hoping that we can overcome that crisis as well. The refugee crisis is much stronger. The international and national order that has been established by the British and by the French after the First World War in the Middle East and in the north of Africa has lasted for 100 years almost. That's a tremendous success. But now, all the states that have been created 100 years ago, or many of them, are collapsing, one after the other. 20 years ago, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Syria, the north of Iraq. And we have unstable situations in Afghanistan and other countries in the region as well. And it has produced millions of refugees. Millions of refugees in Syria, inside and outside the country. Syria, a proud country of 22 million people a couple of years ago, has lost 4 million people now living as refugees in Jordania, in Lebanon and in Turkey. Syria has more than 7 million people as refugees inside the country. That means half of the populations have become refugees. And in order to have an impression what it means for such a country, Germany has 82 million people, and if you compare Germany with the situation in Syria, it would mean that 41 million people in Germany would become refugees if the country would be in a similar way unstable as Syria has been. This is a dramatic situation, and the question is, how well can we respond to that? We are responding by military action in the Western Alliance in order to fight ISIS. We are responding by providing aid to the people on the ground, but I'm afraid this answer is not sufficient, and this answer will not help us to avoid chaos and to help the people in need. And this is why, when in August and September this year, thousands, tens of thousands of Syrian and Iraqi people left their region, went from Turkey to Greece, from Greece to Macedonia, from Macedonia to Serbia, from Serbia to Hungary, and later to Croatia, Slovenia, Austria, and Germany. We were facing a basic choice. And we had two options. Option one would have been to say, well, that's a regional problem of the Middle East. We are not concerned by that. We are not interfering. Please stay where you are. And the second option was the option to say, well, we have European values, German values, that we consider, as a matter of fact, as universal values, because they are laid down in the declarations and decisions of the United Nations. And these humanitarian values require aid and support for those in need. And when we see the people coming to Germany, coming to Austria, then I see an enormous amount of people, but I see people. I see girls and boys and women and men. And all of them have lost everything. They have lost their home country, they have lost their job, they have lost their relatives, and they have lost the perspective to live a good life in a foreseeable future. And this is why Germany has decided not to reject these people, not to build fences and walls, but to say it's a challenge for all of us, and we have to accept the people, we have to help the people, and even if the amounts are enormous, nobody would believe that a country like Germany with 82 million people, one of the most competitive countries in the world, would not be able to provide substantial aid for these people in need. And therefore I say the decision we have taken is highly controversial in Germany. Many people are upset, but I'm pretty much convinced the majority of my compatriots will support that decision of Chancellor Merkel, and I'm proud, and I say it honestly, that I'm able to support Chancellor Merkel in this mission. That is a mission that is perhaps the biggest challenge over the last year, but we have to accept the challenge and we have to look for a good solution. What can the solution be? Solution can only be that we are stabilizing the region, that we are trying to find arrangements with Turkey, Lebanon, Jordania, that we are able to provide perspectives for the people that would allow them to stay in the region until the civil war is over. And it will be over sooner or later, but nobody knows when this will be. If we can come to arrangements between Europe and Turkey, if we can come to a strategic concept for the region, then probably people would no longer feel the need to come by boat and by other means to 7 different countries in order to arrive in Germany. We could arrange numbers, fixed numbers with the United Nations Refugee Organization. We could allow people to come to Germany, to the Netherlands, to Sweden, and perhaps also to the United Kingdom, but they would be able to learn German and English before coming. They would be able to prepare for the resettlement, and then we could stabilize an entire region that is threatened by destabilization, and the destabilization would have a disastrous effect for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, you see there are enough of challenges and enough of issues for debate. We as politicians, we have an obligation to solve problems that we cannot yet see, because they will materialize in 20 and 30 years from now. Nobody of us would then still be a minister in government, with perhaps one exception, that is Wolfgang Schäuble, our Minister for Finance, who's a member of Parliament for 40 years already and a member of government for almost 20 years. But we have to draw the lines for the development of the future that will allow us prosperity. And in order to have prosperity, we need a flourishing private sector. You are part of that private sector. You have taken your responsibility. You have achieved an awful amount of success over the last 40 years. I would like to congratulate for all this, and I wish you a wonderful evening and all the best for the future. Thank you so much.